The letter hit the table between them like a thrown knife. Ruby Donnelly stood in the doorway of the Stone Ranch office, her dark hair pinned back in a way that refused to stay neat after 3 days of stagecoach travel, her green eyes cutting straight through August Stone like she already knew every secret he had ever tried to bury. She was not what he had pictured, not even close. And the way she was looking at him, like she could see the betrayal coiled at the center of his advertisement, before he had even said a word, made his throat close. "You wrote that you needed someone with experience managing a cattle operation," she said, her voice low and steady, and nothing at all like he had expected. "You did not write that you needed someone to pretend to be your wife, so your uncle cannot contest the inheritance clause in your father's will." August Stone, 32 years old, broad-shouldered and worn in the way that men who worked land rather than talked about it got worn, did not move from behind his desk. He had read her application letter 6 times. He had read all 14 applications 6 times. Ruby Donnelly's had been the only one that had actually answered every single question he had posed in the Tucson Territorial Advertiser in the spring of 1882. She had listed her competencies without embellishment. 3 years running her late father's cattle operation in New Mexico, full literacy, bookkeeping, veterinary knowledge, and a practical understanding of water rights law. He had expected someone older, or someone desperate in the way that poverty makes people desperate, or someone who had misread the advertisement and arrived confused. He had not expected this. "How did you find out?" he asked. "Your foreman told the cook told the woman at the mercantile, and the woman at the mercantile told me when she was wrapping my travel biscuits," Ruby said. She stepped further into the room and pulled out the chair across from his desk without being invited. "I rode 3 days from Las Cruces, Mr. Stone. I'm not turning around until you tell me the truth about what you actually need." The truth. August looked at the window behind her, at the dust rising off the yard where his hands were moving cattle into the south pasture. The truth was that his father, Elias Stone, had died 4 months ago and left the entirety of the Stone Ranch, 4,000 acres of the best grassland in Cochise County, Arizona Territory, to August. But the will had a clause, one his father had inserted in his final months, possibly under the influence of August's uncle, Clifford Stone, who had been circling the ranch like a vulture for 20 years. The clause stated that if August remained unmarried by the 1st of September 1882, which was 11 weeks away, the ranch would pass into a trust managed jointly by August and Clifford, which meant, in practical terms, that Clifford would drain it dry within a year. August had not written a mail-order bride advertisement. He had not wanted to deceive anyone. He had written a legitimate advertisement for a ranch manager, someone who could take over the operational side of the business while he focused on the legal battle. He was also simultaneously fighting against a water rights claim by a neighboring rancher named Delbert Crane. But somewhere in the posting of that advertisement, the word had gotten out through Clifford's network. August suspected that the real reason August needed someone was for the marriage clause. And now the most qualified applicant who had answered his advertisement was sitting across from him, knowing the full shape of the trap she had ridden into. "The foreman should not have said anything," August said. "No," Ruby agreed. "He should not have, but he did, so here we are." She folded her hands on the desk. She was 26, he calculated from her letter, which meant she had been running a cattle operation since she was 23. The operation had survived 2 drought years and a disease outbreak before her father died, and the property was claimed by creditors. She had nothing to go back to in Las Cruces. He had not known that when he read the letter, but it occurred to him now, looking at the steadiness in her expression, the kind of steadiness that was not the absence of fear, but the decision to function in spite of it. "I want to be clear about something," Ruby said. "I did not ride here to become anyone's solution to a legal problem. I rode here because your advertisement described exactly the kind of work I know how to do." But I also rode here because I have nothing left in New Mexico, and I am not too proud to tell you that. August leaned back in his chair. So what do you want? I want what the advertisement offered, a fair wage, a position with real responsibility. A roof that is not a boarding house. She paused. And I want to know if the rest of what your foreman said is true. August was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a horse whinnied. Somewhere in the yard, a gate creaked on its hinge. He had practiced not saying things his whole life. His father had been a man who believed silence was strength, but Ruby Donnelly was looking at him like silence was the one thing she would not accept. It is true, he said. There is a marriage clause. My uncle drafted the language, and my father signed it in November, 2 months before he died. I believe my uncle manipulated my father at a time when he was not thinking clearly. He pressed his palms flat on the desk. I have been trying to find a legal argument against the clause through an attorney in Tombstone, but the will is valid. I have until September 1st. Ruby did not say anything immediately. She looked at the window, then at the papers on his desk, then back at him. That is a dark situation, she said. Yes. And you thought you could solve it by finding someone willing to do the job you advertised, and perhaps, along the way, find someone you might actually consider marrying. I thought, August said slowly, that if I was honest in the advertisement about wanting a capable person, I might find someone I could actually stand to spend time with. The rest, the clause, the deadline, I thought I could keep separate. You cannot keep anything separate in a small territory, Ruby said. You should know that. I do know that now. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the yard, and August watched her, unable to look away. There was something in the way she moved, deliberate, economical, no wasted motion, that reminded him of the land itself, of the way good grazing country did not announce itself but simply was what it was. Show me the operation, she said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. Show me what you are running here. The cattle, the range, the water situation, the books. She turned around. I came here for a job. Show me the job. Then we can talk about the rest. August Stone had not been told what to do by another person since his father died, and possibly not very often before that either. He stood up, reached for his hat, and walked toward the door. Follow me, he said. She already was. The Stone Ranch sprawled across the San Pedro River Valley in a way that made Ruby's heart do something complicated when she first saw the whole of it from the top of the eastern ridge. Her father's operation had been a fraction of this size, but the principles were the same: water, grass, healthy stock, and enough hands who knew what they were doing. August walked her through every corner of it with the focused attention of a man who genuinely loved what he was showing her, and Ruby began to understand, watching him, that his attachment to this land was not about money or pride. It was something older and quieter than both. He had grown up here. She could see it in the way he knew every fence post by name, the way he stopped to check the hooves of a limping yearling without being asked by anyone, the way he spoke to his hands with the ease of a man who did not need to perform authority because he had earned it. Frank Delgado, the foreman who had apparently been too free with information at the wrong moment, was a broad man in his 40s who greeted Ruby with visible guilt and genuine respect in equal measure. I apologize for the loose talk, Frank told her quietly when August was inspecting the water trough. Just tell me the operation is as solid as it looks, she said. Solid as bedrock, Frank said, except for the water problem. The water problem, as August explained it that afternoon under the shade of a cottonwood by the river, was the other crisis running parallel to the inheritance clause. Delbert Crane, whose land bordered the Stone Ranch to the north, had filed a claim with the Territorial Water Authority, arguing that the Stone Ranch's diversion of the San Pedro for irrigation was reducing flow to his property. If Crane's claim succeeded, August would lose the right to the irrigation channels his father had built 30 years ago, which would effectively make the ranch's southern pastures unworkable. Crane is not interested in the water, August said, picking up a flat stone and looking at it without throwing it. He is interested in the land. If I cannot water the southern range, I have to sell it, and Crane will buy it at a fraction of what it is worth. Do you have documentation of the original water right? Ruby asked. August looked at her sideways. I have my father's records. Are they complete? Mostly. Then we find the gap and fill it, Ruby said. She was watching the river move the way it bent around a root system and found a new channel without stopping. I dealt with a water dispute in New Mexico. Different territory, similar law. The key is establishing beneficial use across consecutive years. Do you have crop records? Herd counts tied to specific pastures. August stared at her. You know water rights law. I told you that in my letter. You wrote that you had practical understanding. I thought you meant you had been present when someone else handled it. Ruby turned to look at him directly. I handled it myself. I won the claim. She paused. I told you exactly who I was in that letter, Mr. Stone. You just expected less than what I wrote. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a recalibration, of a man adjusting the entire framework of a situation he had thought he understood. August, he said. If you are going to help me, you should call me August. Ruby, she replied. He held out his hand and she shook it, and neither of them let go quite as quickly as the formality of the moment required. That first week was not romantic. It was something better than romantic, or at least something that would later prove to be the foundation of romance, which is the slow accumulation of evidence that another person is exactly who they appear to be. Ruby took over the ranch's books within 3 days, not because August handed them over, but because she asked to see them, and then, sitting at the table in the ranch office for 6 hours straight, found 3 accounting errors and a billing discrepancy with a supplier in Benson that had been costing the ranch money for 2 years. She presented her findings to August without ceremony, sliding the corrected ledger across the desk with a note in the margin. August read the note. He read it again. He looked up. My father trusted the supplier, he said. Your father was being charged for grade A feed and receiving grade B, Ruby said. I am not saying the man is dishonest. I am saying the invoice does not match the delivery records. I will ride to Benson, August said. I will go with you, Ruby said. He started to say that was not necessary, but Ruby was already pulling her jacket from the hook by the door, and August Stone found, to his considerable surprise, that he had absolutely no desire to argue with her. They rode to Benson together in the early morning, before the June heat had settled its full weight over the territory. The ride was 17 miles, long enough for silences to develop, and then ease into conversation in the natural way that long rides allow. Ruby learned that August had a younger brother named Caleb who had gone to California 3 years ago and not come back, that August had studied land law briefly at a college in Tucson, before his father's health made it necessary for him to return to the ranch, and that his favorite time on the property was the hour before sunrise when the cattle were still and the air smelled like the river. August learned that Ruby's mother had died when Ruby was 12, that she had a sharp, dry humor that announced itself so quietly that you were already laughing before you realized you had found something funny, that she rode a horse named Catalina who had a white blaze on her forehead and an opinion about everything, and that the dark past she carried, the loss of her father's ranch, the failure of her father's health, the erasure of everything she had worked toward, had not made her bitter. It had made her exacting. She measured everything carefully because she had learned that the world did not offer second chances for free. The supplier in Benson, a man named Harris who had a weathered face and the look of someone who expected to be caught eventually, attempted to explain the discrepancy as a bookkeeping error on his end. Ruby produced 3 years of his invoices alongside 3 years of delivery receipts and laid them side by side on the man's own counter. That is not a bookkeeping error, she said pleasantly. That is a pattern. Harris looked at August. August looked at Ruby. Then August looked back at Harris with an expression that had very little pleasantness in it. They left Benson with a written agreement for a price correction and 3 years of back credit applied to the ranch's account. August was quiet for the first mile of the ride home. Ruby let him be quiet. She was good at silence, had learned it from years of negotiating with men who expected noise to fill every gap. "You do that very well," August said finally. "What?" "Lay things out. Make it impossible for anyone in the room to see anything but the truth." Ruby considered that. "My father taught me that numbers do not lie," she said. "People lie. Numbers tell you exactly what happened if you are willing to look." August rode beside her for another minute before he said, "Ruby, yes, I owe you an honest conversation about the clause." She had been waiting for it. "I know. I'm not asking you to marry me," he said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. What I was hoping, what I had perhaps vaguely imagined, was that if I found the right person for the position, we might come to a mutual decision about the rest. Over time," he paused. "I did not want to trap anyone." Ruby looked at the road ahead, at the way the late afternoon light was turning the desert gold. "I believe you," she said, "but you are also aware that the clock is running." 11 weeks, Ruby said, "which is enough time for two reasonable adults to determine whether they can stand each other well enough to make a legal agreement that serves both parties." August glanced at her. "Is that what marriage is? A legal agreement?" "For some people," Ruby said. "For others it is something else." She did not look at him. "I have not decided yet which kind I am interested in." August said nothing, but she heard something shift in the rhythm of his breathing, a slight alteration, and she filed that away alongside everything else she was learning about him. Clifford Stone arrived at the ranch on a Wednesday morning in the second week of Ruby's employment, uninvited and unannounced, driving a buggy that was too fine for the unpaved road, and wearing a suit that was too fine for the heat. He was 60 years old, August's father's younger brother, and he had the particular handsomeness of a man who had spent his life being underestimated and had learned to use it. He stepped into the yard with a wide smile and eyes that catalogued everything they touched. "August," he said, clasping his nephew's hand, "I heard you took on some help." August stood between Clifford and the house with his arms folded and his face carefully neutral. Ruby was watching from the porch, where she had been reviewing the water rights documentation with a deliberateness that had nothing accidental about it. "This is Ruby Donnelly," August said, "ranch manager." Clifford's eyes moved to Ruby with immediate calculating interest. "A woman manager," he said with the tone of someone storing information. "A qualified manager," August said. Clifford walked toward the porch with his smile still engaged. "Miss Donnelly," he said, "Clifford Stone, August's uncle." "I know who you are," Ruby said. She did not stand up. Clifford's smile did not waver, but his eyes cooled by exactly 1 degree. "I imagine August has told you about the family situation." "He has told me everything relevant to managing this ranch," Ruby said, "which is what he hired me for." Clifford looked at August. "She is forthright." "She is excellent at her job," August said. What followed was 2 hours of Clifford's version of a social call, which was actually a reconnaissance mission, so thinly disguised that Ruby marveled at the man's confidence in other people's failure to notice it. He asked about the herd count, the revenue projections, the status of the water claim. He mentioned the inheritance clause twice in casual conversation, once by referring to his brother's wishes, once by expressing his hope that August was well, given the upcoming change in the ranch's management structure. After Clifford left, August stood in the yard watching the buggy until it disappeared. Ruby came to stand beside him. "He is going to contest the will if you do not fulfill the clause," she said. "He has already spoken to 2 attorneys," August said. "I know because I have the same attorney's clerk." "What does he want?" "The ranch itself. He wants to sit on the trust board, which means he wants access to the revenue." August turned toward the barn. "He has debts in Tucson, gambling debts. My father knew about them, which is why he never left Clifford direct control." "But the clause was Clifford's idea," Ruby said. "He put it there knowing you were unlikely to marry quickly. He planned to use it." August stopped walking. He turned to look at her. "How do you know it was Clifford's idea?" "Because it is exactly the kind of move a man like that makes," Ruby said. He could not challenge the will outright, so he inserted a condition he expected you to fail. It is a trap built into a legal document. She paused. But traps can be reversed. How? By doing the one thing he did not think you would do. She met his eyes. By fulfilling the clause. The space between them was very still for a moment. August looked at her with an expression that was not quite readable, which was unusual for him. She had already learned that he was a man whose face was generally honest with itself. "Ruby," he said. "I am not proposing anything," she said quickly. "I am stating a fact. The most direct way to remove the trap is to close it on Clifford instead of on you." August nodded slowly. "And what would you need if that were to become a real consideration?" Ruby thought about that carefully. "Time," she said, "and honesty, all of it, not just the parts that are convenient." "All right," August said. "Then I will tell you the part I have not told you yet." They sat on the porch that evening after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and the last light was fading over the Dragoon Mountains to the east, and August told her about Miriam. Miriam had been a woman he had been engaged to 4 years ago. A woman from Tucson whose family had money, and whose opinion of ranch life had proved to be theoretical rather than practical. She had left 3 months before the wedding, not with another man, not for any dramatic reason, but simply because she had decided that the life she was agreeing to was not the life she wanted, and she had been right. And August, though he did not say this explicitly, had been destroyed by it in the particular way that destroys people who are not inclined to show it. "I am not telling you this because I want your sympathy," he said. "I am telling you because it is the reason I wrote the advertisement the way I wrote it. I wanted someone who already knew what this life was, who had chosen it before. Not someone who would choose it for you and then discover she had not," Ruby said softly. "Yes." Ruby looked at the mountains. The sky above them was turning from orange to a deep, bruised purple. "I had something similar," she said. "Not an engagement. A man in Las Cruces who found the idea of a woman who ran cattle very romantic, until he actually had to reckon with what that meant. With me spending 12 hours in the field, coming home smelling like livestock, making decisions about money without consulting him." She paused. "He said I was not what he had expected." "Fool," August said, so quietly and with such flatness that it was not a casual observation but a verdict. Ruby looked at him, and something small and warm moved in her chest. "The problem with my father's land," she said, changing direction the way she always did when she was getting too close to something, "was not the drought or the disease. It was the debt my father had taken on in the 70s when cattle prices were high, and he thought they would stay high. When they dropped, the margin vanished. I spent 2 years trying to renegotiate the terms with the bank in El Paso, and I almost had it. And then my father's heart gave out in March of last year, and without him as the primary borrower, the bank called the whole note." "I am sorry," August said. It was direct and unadorned, and she believed it. "It made me very clear about money," she said, "about never depending on something that can be taken. Is that why you came here, to build something that is yours?" She thought about lying, because the truth was more vulnerable than she was accustomed to being, but she had already told him she required honesty. "Yes," she said. "I came here because the advertisement described real work, real responsibility, and real compensation. I came here because I needed to build something again, and I have the skills to do it." She looked at him. "I did not come here to fall into anyone's legal problem." "No," August said, "but here you are in one anyway." "Here we both are," she corrected. He smiled, and it was the first full smile she had seen from him, the kind that reached all the way up and changed his entire face. And Ruby Donnelly, who was very careful and very precise about everything, felt the bottom drop out of her composure just slightly and reconstruct itself before he could notice. July arrived like a furnace and brought with it 2 pieces of news. The first was that Delbert Crane had filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Territorial Water Board, accelerating the timeline on the water rights case. The second was that, August's brother Caleb had written from San Francisco saying he was coming home. Ruby spent 3 mornings that week in the ranch office going through every record she could find related to the Stone family's water use going back to 1852, when Elias Stone had first diverted the San Pedro. She found the original territorial permit in a tin box under the floorboards of the office where it had apparently been stored for safekeeping, and then largely forgotten. The permit was dated 1854 and specified the exact acreage and usage terms. Alongside it, in a bundle of papers tied with cord, were 30 years of crop records, hand-tallied by Elias in a cramped, precise script. She brought the tin box to the kitchen table on the 3rd morning where August was eating breakfast and set it down beside his coffee cup with a sound that carried the weight of a solution. August looked at the box. He looked at Ruby. She was wearing a plain work dress, and her hair was coming loose on one side, and there was an ink stain on her right hand from the hours she had spent with a pen. And August Stone looked at her standing there with 30 years of legal salvation in a tin box, and understood something that he had been slowly understanding for 3 weeks but had not yet put into words. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked. "Permit, usage records, and 30 years of annual herd counts tied to specific pasture acreage," Ruby said. "Continuous beneficial use from 1854 to present. Crane's claim has no foundation." August stood up from the table. He picked up the permit and read it. Then he looked up at her, and his face was doing the thing she was beginning to know, the thing where his expression went very still and very precise right before he said something that mattered. "You found this in 3 days," he said. "It was sitting under the floor this whole time." "You needed to know where to look," she said. "You were focused on the legal argument. I was focused on the documentation." "My attorney in Tombstone has been on this for 4 months, August said. "Your attorney in Tombstone was not looking in the right place," Ruby said simply. August set the permit down. He took 2 steps toward her and stopped, keeping a respectful distance, but the look on his face was not respectful in the polite, distant sense. It was something more open and more unguarded than anything she had seen from him. "Ruby," he said, "what would it take? What take? For you to stay, not just through September, permanently?" Her heart was doing something ungovernable and she held very still. "Are you asking me as your employer?" "No," he said. "I am asking you as myself." Ruby looked at him for a long time. She looked at his face, which was honest, and his hands, which were the hands of a man who worked, and the window behind him, which showed the land that he loved and that she was startled to realize had already begun to love also. "Ask me again in a month," she said, "after we have dealt with Crane and your uncle and whatever Caleb is bringing back from California." "Fair," August said. "But August," she picked up her coffee, "the answer will probably be yes." Caleb Stone arrived on a Thursday, younger than August by 6 years, and looking like a version of his brother that had been turned sideways by time and a different kind of living. He was lean and tanned from California sun rather than Arizona dust, and he had the particular restlessness of someone who had left something, and had not yet decided if leaving was the right decision. He greeted August with a long embrace that had years of distance and forgiveness wrapped into it, and he greeted Ruby with the frank appraisal of a younger brother, evaluating the woman who had apparently reordered his older brother's entire world in less than a month. "She is not what I expected from a ranch manager," Caleb said to August that first evening, loudly enough for Ruby to hear from the next room. "Nobody is what anyone expects when they actually show up," August said. Caleb came back from California carrying news, and also carrying a hidden motive that he had not put in his letter. He had met a man in San Francisco, a business investor named Alderman, who had heard about the Stone Ranch's position in the San Pedro Valley and had proposed a development deal, a cattle processing partnership that would have made the Stone family considerable money, but would have required them to sell 40% of the ranch's operational rights. Caleb laid this out at dinner on his second night, presenting it with the hopeful energy of someone who had spent 6 months convinced he was bringing home a gift. August listened to the entire proposal without speaking. Ruby, sitting across from Caleb, listened with the same careful attention she gave everything. When Caleb finished, there was a silence that the evening crickets filled from outside. "No," August said. Caleb looked frustrated. "You did not even. 40% of the operational rights means Alderman's people control the grazing rotation," August said. "Which means they control the land use. Which means in 10 years this is their ranch in practice if not on paper. It is a capital injection that would solve." "We do not have a capital problem," Ruby said. Caleb looked at her. It was the first time she had spoken. "We have a cash flow timing problem," Ruby continued, "which is different. The books show that the ranch turns a significant profit in good years and breaks even in bad ones. The issue has been supplier markup and some inefficient pasture rotation. Those are operational corrections, not structural ones." She paused. "I can show you the numbers if that would help." Caleb looked at his brother. August had a small, involuntary expression of pride that he quickly controlled. "She found the San Pedro permit too," August said, "and fixed 3 years of supplier fraud." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "August, are you in love with your ranch manager?" "Caleb," August said, "because you look at her the way father used to look at mother and I want to be prepared." "Caleb, I can hear you," Ruby said from behind her coffee cup. "The room is not that large." Caleb grinned, the first fully relaxed expression she had seen from him, and Ruby found she liked him quite a bit, which was useful, because Caleb Stone was about to become very important to what happened next. Clifford Stone made his second visit on a Saturday, and this time he brought an attorney, a thin man named Pruitt who carried a briefcase and wore the expression of someone who was accustomed to delivering bad news as efficiently as possible. They arrived at the ranch to find August, Ruby, and Caleb all present, which was not what Clifford had planned, and Clifford's composure showed the first crack of the afternoon at the sight of Caleb. "You came back," Clifford said. "I came home," Caleb said. Clifford recovered quickly and gestured to Pruitt, who opened the briefcase and produced a document. "I wanted to discuss the terms of the trust arrangement," Clifford said. "As September approaches, I think it is reasonable to begin planning for the management transition." "There will be no transition," August said. Clifford looked at him with measured patience. "The clause." "The clause requires that I marry by September 1st, August said. "I intend to fulfill it." This was not what Clifford had expected. His eyes moved immediately to Ruby, and she watched him calculate, watched him try to read what was true and what was tactical. "You are engaged," Clifford said. "We have had conversations," August said. Ruby said nothing. She sat very still and watched Clifford's face do the work of reassessment. "A quick engagement is difficult to take seriously," Pruitt said smoothly, from behind his briefcase. "A legal marriage certificate is very easy to take seriously," Ruby said. "I imagine the county clerk in Tombstone would say the same." Clifford looked at her with an expression that was no longer merely calculating but had shifted into something that carried the weight of a new respect and a new threat in equal measure. "Miss Donnelly," he said, "what exactly is your interest in all of this?" "I am interested in the same thing you are," Ruby said. "The security of a stable operation." "Your security," Clifford said, "depends on a man you have known less than a month." "Your security," Ruby replied, "depends on a clause you inserted into a dying man's will without his full understanding of its implications." She held Clifford's gaze. "I am content with my position." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Pruitt went still. Caleb, standing by the window, pressed his lips together against something that might have become a smile. Clifford's voice, when he recovered it, was lower and considerably less warm. "August," he said, "I hope you understand what you are inviting into your house." "I invited her," August said, "deliberately and with full understanding of who she is." After Clifford and Pruitt left, Caleb let the smile finally emerge. "She dismantled him," he told August. "In front of his own attorney." "She stated facts," August said. "That is the most effective way to dismantle someone," Ruby said. She picked up her ledger from the table and went back to work. and neither brother said anything for a full minute, both of them watching the door through which she had passed. The water rights hearing before the Territorial Board was held in Tombstone on the 14th of July, and Ruby rode down with August and his attorney, a steady man named Garrison who had been fighting the Crane claim for months with the conviction of someone who believed in the case, but had been missing the crucial documentation. When Ruby placed the 1854 permit and the 30 years of records on the table in front of the board, Garrison went completely still for approximately 3 seconds, and then began to arrange the documents with the practiced hands of a man who understood immediately what had just changed. Delbert Crane's attorney argued that the records were unverifiable. Ruby produced the chain of signature across every annual count record, cross-referenced with territorial tax records that confirmed the herd numbers. Board chairman, a gray-bearded man named Holloway who had been adjudicating water claims for 15 years, read through the documentation with the careful speed of genuine competence, and then removed his glasses and looked at Crane. "Mr. Crane," Holloway said, "this permit and its accompanying evidence establishes beneficial use that substantially predates your claim and does not impair your access to the river under reasonable measurement." He set down the documents. "Your complaint is dismissed." Crane left the room without looking at anyone. His attorney packed his papers with the deliberately unhurried movement of a man who had been paid regardless of the outcome. In the hallway outside the hearing room, Garrison shook August's hand and then turned to Ruby with an expression of professional admiration that he did not appear to consider extraordinary. "Where did you find the permit?" he asked. "Under the floorboards of the ranch office," Ruby said. Garrison looked at August. August shrugged. "I did not know it was there." "I may need to recommend that you accompany every client who comes to me with a property dispute," Garrison said to Ruby. He said it with complete seriousness, as a professional observation. On the ride back from Tombstone, with the case resolved and the afternoon heat radiating off the road in visible waves, August and Ruby rode side by side in a silence that had gradually transformed over the past weeks from the silence of two strangers who had nothing established yet into the silence of two people who had enough established that the silence itself was comfortable. "August," Ruby said. "Yes. You have been very patient." He looked at her. "Patient with what?" "With me." She kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the shimmer of heat between them and the horizon. "I know that the deadline is 6 weeks away. I know that Clifford is watching. I know you have more pressures than most men would handle without pushing." "I made a promise to give you time," August said. "I am not in the habit of breaking promises." "I know." Ruby was quiet for a moment. "My father was very patient too. It was one of the best things about him. He never made you feel that time was running out even when it was." August let that sit for a moment. Then he said, "You miss him." "Every single day." The road bent around a stand of mesquite, and when it straightened again, the Dragoon Mountains were visible to the northeast, and the evening was beginning to paint itself in long, horizontal bands of color across the sky. Ruby looked at the mountains and then at the man riding beside her, and she thought about the word she had been carefully avoiding, the word that had been accumulating in her like water behind a dam, rising quietly and with absolute certainty. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right. I am not afraid of this anymore." August turned to look at her, and his face was doing the most open thing she had yet seen it do, stripped of every layer of careful management. "The marriage clause," she continued, and her voice was steady and her eyes were on him, "is not the reason I would say yes if you asked me again. It has stopped being about the clause for me. I want you to know that." August stopped his horse. Ruby stopped hers beside him. They were alone on the road, the territory spreading out in every direction around them, enormous and old and indifferent to human complications. "Ruby Donnelly," August said, and his voice had a quality she had not heard from it before, a quality that was not quite certainty and not quite vulnerability but the place where both of those things met. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, "with the condition that it is real." "It will be the most real thing I have done in my life," he said. She held out her hand, and he took it across the space between their horses and held it, and the evening settled around them like a benediction. They rode home in the fading light, holding hands across the gap between their horses until the road narrowed and they had to separate, and both of them laughed at that, a quick, bright, shared laugh that felt like the first fully unguarded moment between them. At the ranch, Caleb was sitting on the porch when they rode in, and he took one look at his brother's face and said, "She said yes." "How did you know?" I asked. August said. "You rode in holding hands," Caleb said. "I could see you from the hill." Ruby dismounted, feeling warmth in her face that had nothing to do with the heat of the day. "We need to plan the legal arrangement," she said. "Garrison can file the application for a marriage license in Tombstone." "Already thinking about the paperwork," Caleb said, grinning at his brother. "She is always already thinking about the paperwork," August said. "It is one of my favorite things about her." The wedding was planned for the first week of August, leaving themselves a 3-week margin before the clause deadline, not because they were uncertain, but because Ruby was systematic and August understood that being systematic was not the opposite of romantic. It was evidence of how seriously she took things. The preparations, in the way of all preparations, revealed new things. Ruby, going through the ranch's household accounts to understand what existed and what needed to be ordered, found a cedar chest in the back of the main bedroom that she had not previously opened. She opened it to take inventory and found, wrapped in cloth, a collection of letters. They were Elias Stone's letters to his wife, August's mother Margaret, who had died when August was 19. They were love letters, spanning 40 years, and they were extraordinary not in their grandeur, but in their precision, in the way Elias Stone had written about Margaret with the same seriousness and attention that August brought to the land. Ruby closed the chest and did not tell August about the letters immediately. She waited until that evening after dinner when the house was quiet, and she brought him to the chest and opened it. August sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the letters. He did not pick them up right away. He sat very still with his hands on his knees, and Ruby sat beside him, and eventually he reached in and took the top letter and read it, and she watched his face do something private and important, and she did not say anything at all. When he folded the letter back into its cloth, he said, "I did not know he wrote to her." "He wrote them every week," Ruby said, "even when they were on the same property." "I saw the dates." August looked at the chest. "He never showed them to us." "Maybe they were for him," Ruby said, "a way of staying clear about what mattered." August was quiet for a long time. Then he reached over and took her hand without looking at her, and they sat there together in the lamplight with the chest of letters between them and the dark past and the difficult future and the particular grace of the present moment. "I want to write you letters," he said finally. Ruby looked at him. "We live in the same house." "I know," he said. "I still want to write them." She leaned her head against his shoulder, which surprised both of them, the naturalness of it, the way it required no negotiation. "I would like that very much," she said. The first letter arrived on her pillow 2 mornings later, written in August's clear, deliberate handwriting on a sheet of ranch stationery. It was not long, 4 sentences, but every sentence was exact and irreplaceable and told her something true. She read it 3 times and then folded it carefully and put it in the cedar chest beside Elia's letters to Margaret. She wrote back that evening. She had not known until she started writing that she had this in her, this capacity for putting the interior things into language. But it turned out that, when you found the right recipient, the words came without being forced. She slid the letter under his office door before she went to bed. The morning of the wedding was clear and hot with the particular clarity that July in Arizona produces after rain, the sky an impossible blue, the desert smelling of wet creosote and possibility. They were married in the small church in the town of Benson, because Ruby had no particular attachment to Tombstone, and August had spent enough time there in courtrooms that it felt wrong for a wedding. Garrison served as a witness. Frank Delgado served as the other witness. Caleb stood beside August and had to clear his throat twice during the vows in a way that had nothing to do with illness. Ruby wore a dress that was not white, because she was not interested in pretending to be something she was not. It was a deep blue, the color of the sky at early evening, and it was the finest thing she had owned since the El Paso bank had taken everything. She had ordered it from a dressmaker in Benson with 2 weeks' wages, and no regret whatsoever. When August saw her walk into the church, he stopped moving entirely for a moment, and then collected himself and stood very straight at the front of the church with the expression of a man who had been surprised by his own good fortune. The minister's name was Reverend Carter, and he spoke briefly and sincerely, and when he asked August to recite his vows, August looked at Ruby and said them slowly, with the weight he gave every important thing. When it was Ruby's turn, she looked at August and said her vows without looking away once, which the Reverend later told his wife was the most certain he had ever seen a bride at his pulpit. Garrison filed the marriage certificate in Tombstone 2 days later. He sent Clifford Stone's attorney a copy by courier that same afternoon. Clifford's response came not by letter but by his own presence, arriving at the ranch on the following Monday with Pruett and a look that had reorganized itself from planning into something less comfortable. He asked to see the certificate. August showed him. Clifford read it twice, and Ruby watched him do the arithmetic of a man who has spent months building toward a specific outcome and has just discovered that the outcome is no longer available. "I want to say," Clifford said carefully, "that I bear no ill will here." "What you want to say and what is true may be different things," Ruby said. Clifford looked at her with an expression that had given up most of its performance and was, for the first time, almost honest. "You are a formidable woman, Mrs. Stone." "I am aware," Ruby said. August walked Clifford to his buggy. They stood together for a moment out of Ruby's earshot, two men from the same blood who had arrived at a truth about each other. Caleb watched from the porch. When August came back inside, Ruby was at the desk already, back to the books, her pen moving with its usual clean efficiency. "What did you say to him?" she asked without looking up. "I told him that the ranch will continue to prosper, and that if his finances become critical enough that he needs genuine help, he should ask directly rather than through legal instruments." Ruby looked up. "That was generous." "He is my father's brother," August said. "My father loved him in spite of everything. I can try to do the same." "In a distant sort of way," Ruby suggested. "In a very distant sort of way," August agreed. She smiled, and he crossed the room to her desk and bent down and kissed her on the top of her head, which was a small and ordinary gesture, but which neither of them would ever stop finding remarkable in the way that small and ordinary gestures between two people who love each other remain remarkable precisely because they are no longer performed for effect, but simply because they are true. The San Pedro River ran clear that August, fed by the summer monsoon rains that came in from the Gulf of Mexico and turned the desert improbably green for 6 weeks. Ruby and August rode the fence lines together in the early mornings, checking the condition of the southern pastures that were now, without question or legal complication, entirely within their right to water. The herd was in good condition. The books were in order. The supplier in Benson had been replaced by a more reliable operation in Wilcox. Caleb, to everyone's surprise including his own, decided to stay. He had come back from California carrying an investor's proposition and a buried homesickness he had not admitted to himself. And once he was home for 3 weeks, he found that the homesickness resolved itself into the simple recognition that the ranch was where he belonged. He took over the management of the northern pasture and a small operation of his own cattle that August helped him establish. He also developed a friendship with a young schoolteacher in Benson named Clara Whitmore, which gave the household a great deal of pleasant speculation to engage with over dinner. Ruby and August wrote each other letters every week, even as they lived in the same house, even as they shared meals and work, and the vast, quiet intimacy of a ranch life that involved being in each other's company for most hours of every day. The letters were different from the conversation, more interior, more careful, more willing to say the things that the business of living sometimes crowded out. August had learned this from his father's letters, the discipline of putting the important things into words so they could not be eroded by the ordinary noise of days. Ruby had learned it from her father too, differently, from the way he had always said what he meant because he knew that there might not be a second chance. In the fall, when the desert cooled and the cottonwoods along the San Pedro turned yellow, and the cattle moved easily on the cured grass of the late-season range, Ruby told August she was expecting their child. She told him in the evening on the porch, with the mountains turning purple in the last light, which seemed to her the right setting for important things. August was silent for a moment, not the silence of someone processing difficult news, but the silence of someone receiving something they had not allowed themselves to hope for, and then he put his arm around her and held her against his side with a care that was also a kind of strength, the way good land holds water. "A boy or a girl," he said. "Do you have a feeling?" "Too early," she said. "Does it matter?" "Not even slightly," August said. "I just want to know who is coming." "Someone remarkable," Ruby said dryly. "Given the parentage." August laughed, the full laugh that she had come to consider among the finest sounds she knew, and kissed her temple, and the evening settled around them in the way that evenings do when there is nowhere else you would rather be. The winter of 1882 into 1883 passed with the rhythm of a settled life, which does not mean an easy life but a life that has its feet under it, a life that knows its own shape. Ruby managed the books through the fall sell-off and the winter procurement cycle, and found, to her deep satisfaction, that the ranch would turn its most profitable year in a decade now that the supplier fraud was corrected and the water rights were secure. She sent the projection to Garrison in Tombstone, who sent back a letter of professional congratulation that she framed, to August's considerable amusement, and hung in the ranch office. Clifford Stone surfaced once more, in November, not in person but through a letter, a careful, somewhat deflated letter in which he acknowledged the marriage and the fulfillment of the clause and expressed, in the stiff language of a man who is not practiced at contrition, something that approximated an apology. He had borrowed money from a bank in Tucson to cover his gambling debts and was attempting to stabilize his situation. He did not ask for anything directly. August wrote back. He was brief and fair. He did not offer money. He understood that this would not actually help Clifford, but he offered a conversation, when Clifford was ready, about what legitimate involvement in the ranch's future might look like for a man who was, after all, family. Ruby read the letter before August sent it and said nothing, but nodded once, which was her highest form of approval. Spring came in with rain and blooming Palo Verde, and the calving season that brought 43 new animals into the Stone herd, which Ruby catalogued with meticulous attention, and which August helped deliver, including one at 3 in the morning during a rainstorm, after which they came back to the house muddy and exhausted and laughing at something neither of them could afterward explain. And Ruby made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table while the rain hammered the roof, and the new life they had both been building settled further into its own foundations. Their son was born in May of 1883, at the ranch, with a midwife from Benson named Mrs. Cabrera, who had been delivering children in the San Pedro Valley for 20 years, and whose presence was so calm and capable that August, who had positioned himself outside the bedroom door in the posture of a man trying not to pace, found it almost possible to breathe. Ruby labored for 9 hours, which Mrs. Cabrera described as entirely reasonable for a first, and when the child arrived he was loud and healthy and had Ruby's dark hair, and when he finally stopped screaming, August's gray eyes. They named him Elias for August's father, and for the letters in the cedar chest, and for the particular kind of love that writes itself down so it will not be forgotten. Caleb married Clara Whitmore in June of the same year in the same church in Benson, and the wedding was a considerably more festive affair than August and Ruby's had been, with a good portion of the town in attendance and a celebration afterward that lasted until well into the evening. Ruby danced, which August had not known she could do until that evening, and danced with some skill and obvious pleasure, and August watched her from across the room for a long time before he crossed to her and held out his hand and danced with her himself, a little stiffly because he was not as practiced, and she guided him through it with a patience that he recognized as the same patience she applied to everything she valued. "You are a good teacher," he told her. "You are a willing student," she said. "That is most of the work." That summer, the territory continued to change around them in the ways that the 1880s were changing everything in Arizona: more settlers, more towns, more legal structures imposing themselves on a landscape that had been governed for generations by older laws. The Apache Wars were in their final years, and Ruby and August were not untouched by the weight of what was happening around them. They understood that the land they lived on had its own long history that predated the Stone family's permit by centuries, and they carried this awareness as a counterweight to their own attachment to place. Frank Delgado's wife, Maria, had Apache ancestry, and her family's experience of the territorial changes was one that Ruby listened to carefully, without presumption, and that shaped how she thought about the land she was now managing, about stewardship rather than simply possession. She and Maria became genuine friends, bound first by proximity and the shared rhythms of ranch life, and then by the kind of trust that develops between people who are honest with each other about difficult things. Ruby brought this perspective to the way she managed the ranch's relationship with the surrounding community: fair dealing, no debt left unpaid, no promise left unkept. It was a form of ethics that August already practiced, but that Ruby made more systematic, extending it into formal written agreements with their suppliers and their hands, making explicit what had previously been understood only informally. August watched this with admiration that he expressed in letters and in the small, daily acknowledgments that had become the language of their partnership. The coffee already made when she came in from an early ride, the lamp moved to her desk without being asked, the deliberate choice to sit beside her in the evenings rather than across from her, closing the small distances that could, if unattended, grow into larger ones. Their second child was a girl, born the following spring in 1884, with Ruby's green eyes and a disposition that was apparent from her first hours, absolutely certain about what she wanted and completely uninterested in compromise. They named her Margaret, for Elias Stone's wife, for the woman whose love had been documented in a cedar chest and who had shaped August without either of them knowing it. "She is going to run this ranch," Caleb announced when he held her for the first time. "She is going to run whatever she decides to run," Ruby said, "but we will teach her everything she needs to know to make the choice herself." Elias, at 11 months, watched his sister arrive with the concentrated seriousness of a person encountering a major development in his world, and then apparently decided she was acceptable, because he crawled directly to where she had been laid in her basket and sat beside her with his hand resting gently on the edge of the blanket, a guardian so small he needed guarding himself. August had been watching this from the doorway, and Ruby saw his face from across the room, saw the expression that was not quite belief and not quite gratitude, but the particular quality of a man who has received more than he thought he deserved and has decided to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. He crossed the room. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed where she was propped against the pillows, still tired from the labor, the baby sleeping, Elias installed at the basket, the afternoon light falling through the window in long golden bars. He took her hand and did not say anything, and she leaned her head against his shoulder in the way she had the first time all those months ago, the naturalness of it unchanged. "I want to write you a letter," he said. "Write it," she said. "Right now. Right now." He reached across to the bedside table for the small notebook he kept there and the pencil inside it, and he wrote it while she watched, a letter that she would read later and add to the cedar chest beside all the others, where they would sit together. Elia's letters to Margaret, August's letters to Ruby, and eventually the letters Ruby had written to August that he kept in a separate bundle tied with the same cord. The whole archive of a love that had been built carefully and honestly on the bedrock of mutual respect, and two people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of who the other one actually was. The years that followed built on this foundation in the way that good things build, not without difficulty, not without the particular griefs and adjustments that come with raising children and managing land and living alongside other people's lives, but with the continuity of something rooted. There were hard seasons. The drought of 1886 hit the San Pedro Valley badly, and Ruby spent 3 months restructuring the ranch's financial position to carry the operation through without laying off a single hand, a feat that Garrison in Tombstone described in writing as the finest piece of agricultural finance management he had witnessed in 20 years of territorial law. August rode every inch of the range during that drought, checking on the herd personally, coming home in the evenings with the dust of the land on him, and a tiredness that Ruby met with water and food, and the particular attentiveness that was one of her most quietly extraordinary qualities, the capacity to see exactly what was needed and provide it without making the need into a performance. There were celebrations. Caleb and Clara had twins in 1885, a boy and a girl, born a year and a half ahead of Margaret, which meant that the Stone Ranch's next generation was arriving at a pace that kept Mrs. Cabrera regularly employed. The holidays became large and loud and full of the children who were growing up between the two households, between the ranch house and the smaller house Caleb had built on the northern edge of the property, growing up knowing the land the way their parents and grandparents had known it, as a living thing that required attention and returned it. Clifford Stone died in 1887, at 65, of a heart condition that had gone undiagnosed for years. He and August had managed, in the years since the Claus debacle, to arrive at something that was not warmth, but was a functional peace, built on August's patience, and on Clifford's late-life recognition that his long scheme against the ranch had cost him more than it had ever come close to winning. August arranged a respectful burial in Tucson, paid the outstanding account with the undertaker, and did not speak poorly of his uncle to his children, saying only that Clifford had been a complicated man who had not always chosen well, which was a mercy he had learned from his father's example. Ruby, watching August deal with Clifford's death with the same steadiness he brought to everything, thought for the 100th time about what he had been when she arrived, a man holding a failing situation together with both hands, alone, too proud to be fully honest about the trap he was in, and what he was now. A man who had allowed himself to be known completely by someone who had come to his door looking for work and had found along the way the thing she had not been looking for at all. She wrote him a letter that evening. It was different from the others, not a description of the interior weather of their life together, but a kind of accounting, the way she had always approached truth, item by item, clearly, without embellishment. It said, "I came here with nothing but competence and a suitcase, and I leave every morning from this house with more than I can calculate. You make me richer by being exactly who you are." I do not say this enough in conversation because we are always talking about important things, and this is also an important thing but a different kind. I love you with the same precision I love this land, which is to say completely and permanently and without reservation. Your wife, Ruby. She slid it under his office door before she went to bed. He came to find her in the morning before the rest of the house was awake, while the pre-dawn dark was still settled over the range, and the air smelled like the river and the possibilities of a new day had not yet been specified into duties. He sat on the edge of the bed and held the letter with both hands. He looked at her with the expression that was fully open and fully his. "I have been trying to find the right words for the same thing for 5 years," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I wrote it first." He folded the letter carefully, exactly as carefully as he had folded his father's letter that night in the bedroom, and set it on the bedside table. Then he lay down beside her in the dark, and she turned toward him, and the morning came up slowly over the Dragoon Mountains the way it always did, changing the sky from black to gray to the particular shade of blue that meant another day of the life they had built was beginning. Elias was 6 now, and Margaret was 4, and there was, as Ruby had been quietly aware for 3 weeks, a third child coming, which she had not yet told August. She had been waiting for the right moment, which she had always thought was probably superstition until she had children and understood that it was actually a form of respect, waiting until the truth could be received properly when there was space for it. She told him on the porch that evening after dinner, with the mountains doing their evening transformation in the distance. August sat very still for a moment. 3, he said. 3, Ruby agreed. He looked at the mountains and then at his wife, who was sitting across from him with the lamplight from inside the house making her face warm and clear, and who had ridden into his yard on an afternoon in June of 1882 as the most qualified person who had answered his advertisement, a fact that had stunned him then, and that he had spent every day since thinking was the greatest good fortune of his life. "Another letter," he said. "Not yet," Ruby said. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. "Just sit here for a minute." He held her hand. The evening settled. The cattle moved in the south pasture with their slow, purposeful rhythm. Somewhere in the house, Elias called out for his mother in the half-awake way of a child not ready to release the day, and Ruby called back that she was there. She was right outside. Everything was all right. His voice quieted. August squeezed her hand. "Everything is all right," he repeated softly, not to anyone in particular, but meaning it in the way that a man who has lived through doubt and loss and the particular darkness of building something alone can mean it when the darkness has fully and completely passed. "Yes," Ruby said, "it is." The third child was a boy, born in the late summer of 1888, healthy and loud, with August's eyes and an appetite from his first hour that made Mrs. Cabrera laugh. They named him Thomas, for no one in particular, and for the simple pleasure of a name that had room in it. And he arrived into a household that was already crowded with love in the specific and irreplaceable form that a family makes when it has been built honestly, by two people who had once sat across a desk from each other in the summer heat of Arizona and decided to tell each other the truth. The Stone Ranch entered the 1890s as the most stable and productive operation in Cochise County, managed with the same careful precision and the same deep attention that Ruby had brought to it from her first week, and that August had been practicing, in his own way, since he was old enough to follow his father through the pastures. They hired additional hands as the operation grew, and Ruby trained 2 of them in bookkeeping herself, because she believed in making the knowledge available rather than keeping it scarce, because she had once had nothing except her own competence, and she knew what that felt like. Garrison came to the ranch for dinner one autumn evening in 1889 and told them, with the satisfaction of a man closing a long case, that the Stone Ranch's water rights were now among the most thoroughly documented in the territory, and that no challenge to them could succeed. He toasted them with the whiskey that August poured and looked around the table at the children and at Caleb and Clara on the other side of the table, and at August and Ruby at the head of it, and said that this was exactly what he had been practicing law to protect. Ruby thanked him without ceremony, because she was not given to ceremony, and passed the bread, and the conversation moved on. Later that night, after the house was quiet and the children were asleep, and the autumn dark was settled fully over the range, August and Ruby sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, which was what they did when the evening had earned a kind of reflection. The cedar chest was upstairs with its letters. The books were balanced and locked in the office. The land was exactly what it had always been, and exactly what they had made it together. "Do you remember," August said, The look on Clifford's face when you said you knew exactly who he was and why he was there. I remember the look on your foreman's face when I told him I had read 3 years of invoices in one afternoon, Ruby said. Frank still talks about that, August said. Frank's memory of that afternoon becomes more impressive every time he tells it, Ruby said. August smiled. You were remarkable, he said, from the first moment you walked in. You were not what I expected either, Ruby said. He raised an eyebrow. I expected someone smaller, she said, and more certain of himself. Men who place advertisements usually imagine they have everything arranged. I was not certain of anything, August said. I was barely keeping the whole situation in one piece. I know, Ruby said. That is what I saw first, not the ranch or the claws or any of the rest of it. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. I saw a man who loved something so much he was willing to be honest about how badly he needed help. That is not a small thing. August looked at her across the table, across the years of evenings at this table, across the particular light that the lamp threw over everything it knew. And he thought of the afternoon she had walked through his office door with the dust of 3 days of stagecoach travel on her, and the full, precise, formidable knowledge of who she was and what she was capable of. And he thought of the advertisement he had written and how entirely insufficient it had been as a description of what he was actually looking for, which was this: a person who knew what things were worth and chose them deliberately. A person who made the world more true by being in it. Ruby, he said. I know, she said. I haven't said it yet. I know what you were going to say. Tell me. She looked at him with the green eyes that had not changed, that were still the eyes he had first seen in his office doorway and that he expected to see for the rest of his life, the eyes that were always looking at exactly what was in front of them. You were going to say you love me, she said. And that the advertisement was the best thing you ever wrote, and that you had expected someone less remarkable. August was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, all of that. I know, Ruby said. She reached across the table and took his hand. I love you too, and the advertisement was terrible. You left out everything important about what you were actually looking for. I was not sure what I was looking for, he said. No, she agreed, but I found you anyway. Outside, the desert night was absolute and full of stars, the kind of stars that only show themselves this completely when you are far from anywhere that pretends to compete with them. Inside, the lamp made its small, warm argument against the dark. Upstairs, 3 children slept in the deep, untroubled sleep of people who have never had cause to doubt that the house around them is safe, and that the people in it are exactly who they appear to be. August Stone held his wife's hand across the kitchen table and looked at her with the full, uncomplicated love of a man who has stopped being surprised by his own good fortune and has simply accepted it as the permanent condition of his life, like the river, like the land, like the mountains standing in the dark to the east, enormous and still and unchanged by everything that has happened in their shadow. Ruby Donnelly Stone held her husband's hand and thought about the morning she had read his advertisement in the Tucson Territorial Advertiser, sitting in a boarding house in Las Cruces with nothing but a suitcase and a set of skills, and the particular steadiness that comes from having already survived the worst thing you could imagine. She thought about the 3-day stagecoach ride, about the cook at the mercantile who had handed her the truth along with her biscuits, about the office she had walked into with her heart already made up about exactly one thing, that she would not pretend to be less than she was for anyone's comfort, not even for a man who needed her to be. She thought about how August Stone had looked at her across the desk on that first day, stunned and recalibrating, and already, though neither of them knew it then, irreversibly interested. And she thought about the 11 weeks that followed and the letter she had first slid under the door and the permit under the floorboard and the wedding in the blue dress and the children asleep upstairs and the cedar chest full of letters and the years of evenings on the porch with the mountains doing their slow, patient work of being beautiful. She thought, I came here for work. I came here to build something. I came here because I had nothing else to go to, and the advertisement described exactly the skills I had. She thought. I found everything I had not been looking for. And that seemed in the lamplight in the kitchen, in the good and permanent life she had built on the best land she had ever known, with the best man she had ever met, to be not a surprise but a completion, the final piece of an account that had been adding up correctly all along, had been moving toward this exact sum, had never for a moment been going anywhere else. The lamp burned steady. The stars held their positions. The San Pedro ran in the dark at the edge of the property, following the same course it had always followed, faithful to its own direction, finding its way through the valley and out the other side, as it had done for 1,000 years and would do for 1,000 more. Ruby and August sat at the table until the coffee was cold and the night was deep, and then they blew out the lamp and went upstairs, and the house was quiet, and the range was still, and everything that had needed to be resolved had been resolved, and everything that had been lost had been found, and the story, at last, was exactly as complete as a life well lived and honestly loved can be.